Today, as we continue our series where we're looking at the message of the book of Ecclesiastes, we're going to be looking at a passage in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 12 through 17. Now, last week what we talked about was the passage in chapter 1, verses 1 through 11, where the wise man described the fact that there is nothing new under the sun. While we think of the things that are going on around us as being in many ways unprecedented, because we've never experienced things like this before, in reality, these types of things have always been, they will be from one generation to another, and there's nothing new under the sun. So in this passage that we're going to be looking at today, the wise man describes the pursuit of wisdom and how ultimately he recognized that the pursuit of the things of this life are, in the end, meaningless. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, beginning in verse 12, he says, "So I turned to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will the man do who will come after the king except what has already been done?" This is the idea that we talked about in the last lesson. There's nothing new under the sun. One generation comes, and then it goes. Another generation rises in its place. We replace the king. Well, what are we going to do? We're going to be doing the same things that he was doing. And there's nothing new under the sun. Verse 13, it says, "I saw that wisdom exceeds folly as light exceeds darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that the one fate befalls them both." So he recognizes that it is better, we will turn out better, we will have a better life if we pursue wisdom rather than folly, rather than foolishness. If we do what is wise rather than doing what is foolish, he said it's better to do that. But notice what he said at the end of that verse, in verse 14. "Yet I know that one fate befalls them both." While we can look at all of the reasons why our life will turn out better if we follow this path of wisdom rather than following after foolishness, in the end, what we see is that, well, ultimately, we all go to the same fate. He's talking about we all go to the grave. That eventually all of us are going to pass from this life. And what he's focusing on is he's focusing on this life under the sun, the life that we live here, because for a lot of people, that's all that they focus on. And so when that is all that you focus on, and you try to do the best that you can in this life, and you try to be wise, you try to exercise good judgment, you try to make the most of your opportunities here, and you get ahead and you have success, well, what happens in the end? Same fate as the people who did not pursue the same course that you did, who weren't wise, who acted foolishly, who squandered every opportunity they had. They're going to end up just the same as you. Notice what he says in verse 15. "Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity. For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten, and how the wise man and the fool alike die." We think a lot of times that, well, what we do, we're going to make a lasting impact. We're going to leave something that people will remember us for. Well, ultimately, all of us are going to be forgotten. And as he says in these verses here, he says, well, what's the point then? If I try to do everything right, if I exercise wisdom, if I make the most of my opportunities here, and then you have someone else who doesn't do that. He squanders all the opportunities that he has. He acts foolishly. He doesn't have ambition. He's not making the most of his opportunities. And then in the end, what happens to me is going to happen to him. And we're all equal in death, because we're going to be gone from this life and we're going to be forgotten. And so he says, what's the point of all of this? He said there in verse 17, "So I hated life, and the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility in striving after wind." When we focus on this life, and only on this life, eventually we come to the same conclusion as the wise man here. That we can try to do the best that we can. We can enjoy success. We can keep gaining more and more wealth and more influence and more prestige and all of these things, grow in wisdom. We can do all of these things. But eventually, if all we're looking at is the things that we see here in this life, eventually we're going to come to the same conclusion that, well, what's the point of all of this? Because here you have someone else who, wasn't working as hard as I was, wasn't exercising wisdom as I have been, wasn't making the most of their time here, and in the end, we're all the same. So what's the point? If we're focused on this life and only this life, it really is, in the end, meaningless. All is futility and striving after the wind. We're striving after something that we can never catch, that will not last. We need to recognize that no matter what we do in this life, no matter how successful we might be, no matter how much we advance beyond others, in the end, it's all going to be gone. And so we need to recognize and understand that. Again, as we mentioned last week, the wise man is going to get to, at the end of this book, what is our purpose, because there is a purpose and meaning to life here. But we need to recognize that it is not found in this life. It's beyond this life. So we can have purpose and meaning and have that while we are here, but it's not focused on here. It's focused on something beyond this. And in order to see that, we need to see what he talks about here in this passage. That life and the pursuits of this life are futility and striving after the wind. There's something more. There's something better. And we need to be looking for that. And we're going to see that as we go throughout this series.